Just wait for everyone to.
All right. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. A great warm welcome to everybody here. And thank you very much to Ivana Bartoletti, our special guest this evening, the chair of the Fabian Society and the author of her book, which we will be discussing this evening. Her previous book launches have gone absolutely fantastic. So I'm glad that you're all here watching this event, making the most out of this special attention that she's going to give us, the young Fabians, this evening. So I'm Mark Storm. I'm representing the technology network of the Young Fabians, and I'll be chairing this meeting with Ivana. So to kick things off, Ivana, why did you write this book and who's it for? So who would you want to read this book in an ideal world?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to discuss the book and with you. And so I wrote this book from sort of three different perspectives. The first one is I wrote this book as a privacy professional. I've been working in privacy for many years now. And over the last few years, we've seen the sort of the best of data and what we can do with data, from artificial intelligence to many other things in humanitarian context and all that. But over the last few years, we've also seen some terrible misuse of data, so I've written this book from that perspective. So working in privacy, trying to help organizations harness the value of data, but do it in a way which is respectful of people's autonomy and agency. Also, I've written this book from a feminist perspective because because there's nothing neutral. There is nothing neutral about data. Data is the mirrors society as it is now, with all the hierarchies there are in it. By encoding data, historic data, into the systems that we're producing now, which are about the future, we are at risk of replicating stereotypes that are in society right now. And there's always been a very complex relationship between women and technology. But I wrote this book because I really wanted to challenge the concept of sanctity of data and the sort of the mantra of data-driven societies. We've got to be very careful about it because data in itself is not neutral. So as much as it's not neutral a technological product, because it's always the outcome of whoever has designed it. Too often a group of people who are not representative as society as it is. And finally, I wrote this book as somebody who loves politics. And that's where my sort of Fabianism comes through. So I wrote this book because, to me, now is the time to move away from this sort of data-driven society mantra and really put politics, ideas, and people back in the driving seat when it comes to innovation, and deciding what we're going to use: artificial intelligence, big data analytics, what we're going to use it for. So these three dimensions have all come together, and I really wanted to write a book which was really easy to understand, and I hope it is, and to bring the discussion around artificial intelligence to the kitchen table, to the pub. I just want people to talk about it, because AI is much more than technology. AI is about power. It's about power to transform society for in very many positive ways, but also, if we're not careful, if we're not put humans at the very center of it, in very negative and dangerous way.
So to sum up, the book is for you, all of you who are listening and watching, and you should definitely take a look at it. I have to specifically point out that the second aspect, the feminist angle, that's really, really unique to me as somebody who reads the literature in this field, that you don't get very many angles from a woman's perspective at all. And if we want data and therefore AI to be fully representative of our society, we need a diverse range of viewpoints to point out the issues that only certain people can see. So let's, by the way, we are taking questions in the Q&A, and we will slot them in as appropriate. So please start firing away, and I'll be taking track of them throughout the conversation. So the second question for you, Ivana, is let's talk about data itself. You've already touched on data a little bit. So we are talking about data because data is essentially the fuel for AI. You cannot have AI, you cannot train AI, you can't have any machine learning or anything without data. So, and data is a very modern resource. It's only actually in the form of information. Of course, it's been around forever, but now we're talking about it in huge, huge quantities. So what does data mean to you? Like, what is it?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. Very good question. So we live in a world where we've got a huge amount of data, and data is collected everywhere. There are so many collection points that is unbelievable. So it's your phone, and it's when you go into the tube and you tap your card, or where you go to do shopping. But it's not just that. Data is really, the data collection happens as soon as you start browsing the internet. It's like having a supercomputer pointed at you, looking at exactly what you're doing, creating a sort of synthetic personality of you, of your taste, of your likes, of your dreams. Even a like on Facebook, even a message that you're writing, it says so much. It gives so much information about who you are. And if you think all this is then churned through all these algorithms to create and then used for digital advertising, for micro-targeting, to really look at you and target you with what you want to see at that specific moment of your life. And some of it is not dangerous at all. Some of it is fine. Some of it is when you go on a website and you look at a pair of shoes, and then you go on another page and this sort of advert on a pair of shoes follows you around. And that's fine. There's nothing too bad, but it can become much more than that, because the traces that you leave in your history and your browsing, your journeys online, they are so much, and to an extent that we are losing the distinction between what is very sensitive data and what is not sensitive data. So, for example, at the moment, we have so sophisticated algorithms that can understand very important and very sensitive and information about you from data that is not sensitive at all. And you look at facial recognition systems that can understand whether they claim that they can understand whether you've got a particular disease or not. And so from data that in the first instance is not particularly sensitive data, but then it becomes sensitive when it's used to infer much more complex and private information about you. So data is just everywhere at the moment. There is so much that to an extent is even too much, because the issue is that we don't want, of course, we don't want to miss opportunities to leverage and harness data in a way that could be useful for policy making, for society, and for humanitarian responses. But at the same time, if it's too much, sometimes you wonder, is there a reason why all this data is collected? So data, in reality, a lot of people say, well, data is like oil, but it really, I don't think so, because once you've used oil, you've used it and it's finished. The thing with data is that you use it once and then you can use it again, and you can repurpose it and you can use it for something else. So it's such a valuable resource to organizations. And so in my book, I talk about data as capital, not as oil, because to me, data is capital. And to an extent, it behaves as such. It behaves as capital with all the data accumulation, with all the geopolitical implications of data accumulation, and even with the extractivism, which is to basically go into countries that are financially poor, but they are data rich, and extract all data, as much data as possible from there. Some people do describe this concept as data colonialism, which is really around extracting as much information as possible, as much data as possible, to then train algorithms that can be used across the world. So, and also the issue about data accumulation. So this is data accumulation, and the geopolitical implication, as I said, are massive. With the, of course, there are different ways to deal with personal information. China is very different from Europe, very different from the US, but data has become a sort of geopolitical arsenal that some countries have. They're able to leverage in a very different way between each others. So the behavior of data across the world is more similar to the way the capital would behave rather than oil. And I think we really have got to understand the complexity around this to then say, okay, how are we going to deal with it? What kind of governance, what kind of systems are we going to put in place to really mitigate the impact that this is having at global level? And even from a sort of feminist perspective, the idea of that we are surrounded with the idea of the sanctity of data, neutrality of data, as if data is just right because it's data, then we've got to take it as it is. We've got to take it for granted, and we're going to base our policy on data. But in reality, our policy should be based on policy. It should be based on ideas. And of course, data can support all that. But we've got to understand that data is a picture of society as it is. And if we have algorithms then replacing policy making, then we're at risk of really making mistakes, but not just mistakes, but also really replicating the stereotypes that we have in society right now.
Okay. Thank you. And you touched a little bit on data privacy, Ivana, and you kind of hinted at the fact that you can have a so-called anonymous data set, but then you can cross-reference and actually derive personal information from it. So do you think that the stance that certain bodies are taking, such as the EU, who kind of...
Oh, you're breaking up.
have a defined... No, am I back? I see things moving now.
Yes, you're back. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So the topic was anonymous data sets. So the EU, for example, has in GDPR, you have the concept of an anonymous data set, and you can then sell it on, right? GDPR allows that, but then you have recent studies, for example, the recent Imperial paper, which says you can actually unanonymize it and derive personal characteristics from it. So the question is anonymous data sets, are they actually a lie? And if so, what can we do about them from a privacy standpoint?
So the answer to this is quite complex. First of all, because we have to understand what is the concept of privacy in the first place. So I think we're all going through a pandemic right now, and I don't think there's ever been a moment like this pandemic that has shown how privacy is not about an individual rights and protecting individual freedoms. Yes, I mean, of course, it is also about that. But it's also shown that we're very much interconnected and interdependent. And it's very much shown that my personal data, for example, about my health, are very relevant to you, Mark, because if I have, for example, if I am a positive COVID and I walk too close to you and we have a chat, then I can pass it on to you. So what the pandemic has really shown, and I know I can be controversial here, is that how interconnected we are and how the asset of personal information is crucial, not just to the individual, but also for the common good and for the public good. So there is an enormous value in personal information. The value of personal information is crucial for the collective. And this is why the first thing that I want to say, and that I say in the book, is that I've been in privacy for about 20 years now, and I've always felt very uncomfortable with the concept of individual focused privacy, which is obviously is really important because this is our space, our family life, you know, our freedoms and liberty, that's really important. But this very much individual focused idea of privacy has led to a very tricky way of dealing with it. One way of dealing with it, for example, is consent. The illusion of control that consent has given us. I mean, we are constantly on navigating online and offline in a space which is somewhere in the middle, and we don't have now, but increasingly we're not going to have the capacity, the ability, and even the knowledge to really go through every single privacy notice and say whether we're happy or not, and to be presented with this incredible, almost terrifying journey and experience online, where we have to look at pages and pages of legal documents which are on purpose presented to us in a way which makes us say, okay, now I'm going to skip this because I just want to reach the website and the page that I want to read. Consent obviously is important, but it cannot be the only way that we deal with data. We've got to change this way of this illusion of control, which often is, instead of being sort of control and privacy by design, becomes deception by design, because we're some sort of forced into clicking OK to data collection just because it's too time consuming and too difficult, and it's been presented to us in a very complex way for us to actually read that page. So the concept of privacy is really important, that we really say, okay, what is privacy in 2020? What does it mean? And this is where I would like a younger generation to think about it, because I talk about this a lot with my son. It's like, what does it mean to be privacy in this age? Privacy changes across territories, across jurisdiction. It's different in China, it's different in but what is the deal in 2020, post-COVID? What is the deal between us as individuals and the collective in relation to the greatest asset that we have, which is our personal information? And I'm not talking about ownership. I'm not talking about selling personal data. I'm totally against it, because personal data to me is us as individuals. It's not even a piece of things that we own, it's just us. And so we've got to rethink that. And that leads me to the anonymization thing. Again, one thing that this crisis has shown to us is the complete failure from an infrastructure point of view. We don't, if anything, at the moment, we haven't got enough data, for example, around COVID. The algorithms, what is showing that the artificial intelligence algorithms used at the moment to really help with COVID and understanding this horrendous virus is this data. They do work in a training environment, but then once the algorithm is out there, it doesn't work anymore. And this is because we haven't got enough information, and this is because there is a lot of geopolitics around this. This is because we need, if anything, we need more responsible data sharing and not less. And this is tricky at a time of data nationalism, at a time of populism, at a time of everybody's closed within their own fortress. Anonymization is difficult, is important. And what I always say, we can't lie to people. We can't lie, because anonymizing data is really almost impossible. And there are privacy enhancing technology that we should invest in. But once again, the problem with this privacy enhancing technology like k-anonymity, differential privacy, they are too expensive for organizations to be scaled up. And one of the things I would like to see is, how do we scale up this really important yet too expensive privacy enhancing technologies that would allow organizations to harness data better in a way which is more privacy compliant. But the key challenge here is how do we make the most of the data that we've got, avoiding misuse of data, but also avoiding their misuse. And I think the key concept is, what is the deal between us as digital citizens and the organizations that are using that data? And, you know, this is a time where we've got to be creative about this stuff. I don't understand why, for example, we can't use data cooperatives, new intermediaries between us and the organizations that need the data. We sign a contract between us and a data hub hosted by a trusted third-party organization, and that third-party organizations can do the work for us rather than us having to do that every single time. So this is, I think, the time to be creative about this and rethink new possible ways of harnessing the value of data.
Thank you. Yeah, that last part you mentioned about data cooperatives or data unions, that's a really interesting concept. And you know, it's interesting to think about, is this the new kind of union that we need in this age, or is this a new kind of role that unions might be able to take?
And, you know, and the thing is, I see a question here saying, how do you reconcile the need for more data sharing with not sharing personal data? There is no the dichotomy between the two. So the issue is, you know, what are we going to share the personal data for? And the issue is understanding that the value of a piece of personal information is a massive collective value, as we've seen with this pandemic, that we do need to be able to share information in order to be able to safeguard each other in a way which is, of course, privacy compliant. And there are ways to do that. But it's really important, as we are digital citizens, that we are responsibly digital citizens. We're not having this illusion that we control everything that happens to our data, because it's impossible. But what we're asking is actually those in charge of this, that they do so in a way that it's more transparent, more open. And for that, we may need more enforcement and more legislation.
Okay. Yeah. Now we're on the topic of us being digital citizens. So not just me and you, but everybody who's a citizen being also a digital citizen. So why should regular people get engaged in the topic of AI? You said at the start that this was a topic that you would like to bring to the pub or the kitchen table. So what's in it for normal people?
Well, because AI is transforming the world, and I don't think anybody should leave this transformation in the hands of Silicon Valley. And I'm saying this very clearly. I mean, it's AI has got enormous potential. And if I think, for example, at how much it can be used in healthcare to predict cancer before it happens, how much it can be used in cybersecurity, how much it can be used in fraud detection and fraud prevention. I mean, there are fantastic uses of artificial intelligence. Robotics can really help. Automated cars can also reduce pollution, and they can help the way that we inhabit our cities. So this is the good of artificial intelligence. But what is good and what is bad cannot be decided by only a few people that do so too often in a very unaccountable ways. And what's happening as well is that artificial intelligence and algorithms, they're going to be increasingly used to make important decisions about our life. I'm talking about the right to having a place in education, the right to housing, the right to receive or not a loan. These are things that are so important for people's life. And these automated decisions are happening in the US. What some really brave people and are talking about is called automation of poverty, which basically means that by encoding data into the systems that then make decisions on individuals, what can happen is that the outcome of these decisions can be biased, therefore locking people out from housing, from education, from loans, and whatever is needed. So these are very, very important things. And we cannot leave algorithms to decide policy. We cannot leave the law being decided by computation. This is where I want really people to be involved, and deciding what we're going to use artificial intelligence for is the great issue of our time. At the moment, we have so many flashy products there on display, on sale, and literally claiming that they can do all sorts of things. But these are incredibly dangerous if checks and balances are not in place. Take facial recognition, for example. Not only facial recognition is dangerous when it cannot recognize black faces. That's leading to very, very dangerous situations. But also, regardless of whether one day we may be able to fix that or not, have we decided whether we want facial recognition in our streets? How much is that going to change the way that we inhabit our public spaces? How much is that going to change the way that we behave when we are with our peers, having a drink in the park because we've got a camera pointed at us all the time? These are decisions about the way that we live and the way that we inhabit our world, the physical and the digital one. And these decisions, they have to be made together. And this is where I'd like to see people from every background getting involved in this discussion. It cannot be left by a small group of people that, because they've got access to a lot of data, because they've got a lot of political capital to leverage, then can make those decisions without involving the people who are going to be affected the most. This is where I think it's really important to say, yes, I mean, there is some fantastic potential in these new technologies, great potential. But at the same time, we really got to be clear that the risks of harm could be quite damaging. And I'll give you another example. Algorithms in digital advertising. Now, this is where I fear a lot. And I mean, we're used to navigate to navigate the internet and having a lot of ads looking, telling us, you can look at this, you can look at that. The way that these ads are targeted at us is based on our synthetic personality. It's basically saying, okay, and this is what Mark likes, this is what Mark is probably going to like, and this is what probably Mark is going to be into doing 10 years time. Because we've had so much data and we've matched this data with so many other people that we found some correlation between different kinds of behavior. But by doing so, we get targeted on a daily basis or an hourly basis with a lot of ads. And my question to you is, what happens to our human agency? What happens to the ability to navigate life the way that we want to navigate it? Because we meet people in the park, because we've got a chat, because we fall in love. And that's how we navigate life, because of our body. But what happens where we've got a system and supercomputer pointed at us, hacking our weaknesses, hacking into our personalities, and serving us an ad because this is what they think we're going to like. Human agency and human autonomy is a huge thing. And this is where I think the debate should be. Not about AI as Terminator, not about AI as, artificial general intelligence doing the things that we do in 50 years down the line. What I'm talking about is the here and now. How are we going to govern the change that this huge amount of data coupled with computing power and AI progressing at rocket speed, how are we going to govern this change as a collective? And how are we getting more voices involved in this debate? As I said, AI is much more than technology. This is why I do not want to leave this debate to technologists alone. And this is a debate that is political. Political in the sense that it's about redistribution of power, is about addressing the asymmetry of power that we have in the digital space, where you have some companies having a lot of data and us being powerless to an extent compared to them, but also the asymmetry of data between super powerful algorithms and us humans who are still the same as we were 2000 years ago with the same feelings. Whilst these algorithms are becoming more powerful, we are the same and continue to remain the same. So these asymmetries, they are all about power. And when the discussion is about power, the answer is not technological, but it's political.
Thank you for that. You touched on human agency a little bit, and I'd like to come back to that because that's a really important concept, which sounds like a thought experiment, but is really not, because it's already been happening for the last 10 years or 20 years or so. But what I want to ask now is, you talk about business and government being accountable to the ways that we want our data to be used and the way we want AI to be used. So what does that political mechanism look like, the accountability? And perhaps you can answer this question as well. Is there anybody doing it in the UK at the moment or abroad that is a very good example of somebody who understands it very proactively, tackling the challenges that you're raising?
So I think this is good question. So I think that we all, so the first thing I want to say is that we've got to intervene now, I think, from a regulatory perspective. And I don't mean regulating AI in a sort of sweeping way. but I think we've got to intervene and understand how the existing legislation is dealing with the new issues coming from artificial intelligence. So potential harms in AI would be allocation of harms. So you allocate things in a biased way that's locking out people who are already vulnerable, representational harms by increasing stereotypes and turning them into prejudice because you amplify and scale up existing stereotypes in society. Is society capable right now to deal with this? Do we have the necessary tools to deal with this? My answer is yes, to an extent, but also there are some areas which are completely uncovered. So there is a legal element here. So anti-discrimination law, for example, if I get discriminated in access to a particular service or good because I am of my background, because I'm a woman, or then the issue is, do I have the knowledge to know that that decision has been made by a machine and therefore I can challenge it? And is it clear enough that I've been discriminated? So the issue is that the opacity that is so such a big element of these systems makes existing laws, such as anti-discrimination legislation, very difficult to then enforce. And this is an argument which is being brilliantly developed by Sandra Wodka from Oxford, professor in Oxford. But it's a really important one to understand. Human rights law, maybe similar argument. Consumer legislation, I mean, there is an argument saying, do we have enough legal instruments to prevent and to protect citizens from the potential harms of AI? And the question the answer to that is, yes, we can leverage some, but not everything. Of course, you have the GDPR. But again, we haven't seen yet how much it will help and how much it'll be able to really provide the right level of transparency that we need. The other big thing is, what happens if a system gets it wrong? What kind of redress would you get as a citizen? How are we going as citizens to be protected and to feel that we trust a decision made by a machine? The Center for Data Ethics has recently issued a report looking at how customers feel uneasy when algorithmic systems are introduced in the banking sector. They feel that they're not that easy, especially if they start introducing other categories of data like gender. Or without trust, we can't go anywhere. If I don't trust a system, I mean, think about a very simple example. Think about a flight. Apart from now, you would go now, because we can't really fly, but you know, you would go on a plane and you would sit on the plane and you would start the journey. The issue is you wouldn't go to the plane and open the engine to look how the engine is done, because unless you're an engineer, and you wouldn't be able to understand it, but you trust that that system has followed due process. So my question is, what does that due process look like? And who is going to verify it before it gets used? We haven't thought about any of this yet. We're thinking about all this, but we're not. One of the issues why we're not thinking about all this is because of the mantra of we don't want to stifle innovation. But if you think about the pharmaceutical sector, having clear regulation has not really stifled the pharmaceutical sector. It's quite the opposite. And I'm not thinking about sweeping regulation. I mean, I welcome help from anybody on this, and we can all work together on this. But what does regulation look like? So to me, first is assessing whether current regulation works, the current regulatory and legal framework, if they safeguard from harms of AI, and what else needs to be introduced. I mean, there are different solutions. I mean, people are talking about having kite marks, having stamps, you know, basically as, you know, something that like as you do in the food labeling, when you go to, you buy a product, you say, well, there is a stamp in there that certifies that that particular product has followed due process. Is that something that we could consider in artificial intelligence? Do we need an AI agency that brings together, maybe it could be the CDI itself, that looks at different legislation in different sectors? Because obviously, I mean, there's a much greater difference, a huge difference between regulating AI in the medical sector and regulating AI in another area. It's very, very different. Even issues, you know, like how explainability, they become complex, because if I'm a patient, as you know, I don't really want to know exactly how the algorithm works. I just want to know that it's accurate. But if I'm a doctor and I'm responsible for example, giving a medicine to a patient on the ground of a decision made by algorithm, I want to know how it works, because otherwise then it's my responsibility. So these are all very tricky issues that need to be understood. And, you know, Michael is correct, you know, that in the questions that I can see is the having human in the loop. Exactly, that's correct. But, you know, we need to understand what the human in the loop means. You know, if you have 5 different outputs, all coming from automated systems, and your only input as a human is to decide which one of the 5 are you going to choose. Is that human in the loop or not? I mean, all this will have to be tested as we move forward. And, you know, the Information Commissioner auditing framework is rather interesting from this perspective. I don't know in which form is going to be released after the consultation, but it's an interesting example looking at the key issues around the GDPR and algorithmic systems. But it is correct. I mean, the human in the loop is we have to define exactly what that means. So I mean, and these are the legal implications, and there are all the other implications which are around, you know, as you mentioned, you know, the human agency. So take the medical example, for example, you know, have we really taken into account what's going to happen once we deploy more and more automated systems in health? What is going to be the relationship between doctor and the machine? You know, what's going to happen to her, the doctor, you know, the medical knowledge, what's going to happen to her knowledge, what's going to happen to if machines increasingly make decisions on, and so this is all very complex things that need to be navigated. So it's really important, I think, to say how are we going to deal with this? So the European Union, they've produced a white paper, which I think has the right approach, which is basically saying, let's do a fitness test to verify and to check whether current legislation is sufficient, and then we'll make a decision on where to intervene. In the UK, we have the Centre for Data Ethics. We have the Information Commissioner looking at the personal data processing within their system. So there are, you know, there is work going on, and then we have about 180 policies and documents and principles. There's so many of them that you just think, are they, you know, what are we going to do with them? You know, there has to be an element where we translate ethics into practice. So yes, so that's a little bit where we are in terms of, but this is very much of a discussion that I would like people to have and say, okay, you know, how are we going to bring this forward? How are we going to get involved into all this?
Yeah, it's very interesting your thoughts on this, Ivana, because every time I have this conversation with anyone else in the field, we always seem to arrive at the similar conclusions that we don't actually have enough oversight of the market of the products. Like, is the AI market a fair market if you don't actually know what's inside? Like, as you said, it's like a plane, but you don't have an ICAO to actually verify and certify the planes. You just have to get on it and trust that it does it, right? And nobody knows how to do it. Maybe not even the people who built it themselves. But yeah, would you like to comment on if is there anybody specifically stand out in terms of politicians or anybody apart from you, of course, who's very
But
engaged?
I think there are. I mean, I think there are. So if you think, for example, in the UK, you know, politicians, just I mean, there are. I mean, there's Chion Bura, for example, is brilliant. Darren Jones and Joe Stevens. I mean, we've got people in Parliament who know about these things, and they really know about the relationship between AI as and data as power and the fact that the digital dividends have not and are not distributed fairly, and how we need politics to address that. So we've got, you know, and there is a lot of work that they're doing. So that's really, really important. There is a question here that I like very much from Elliot, and it's around workers' organization within tech companies. This is a very, very good question, because over the last few years, when we haven't seen much accountability of AI, but when we have seen accountability of AI, it's often been because of the courage, bravery of tech workers, especially in the US. So really, you know, and I in my book, I tell the stories of some of them. You know, for example, if you think about the Amazon workers, you know, said, well, actually, we do not want, you know, the recognition, which is the facial recognition software, to be sold to then, you know, and used by authorities in the US that then cage children. You know, so we've seen some real accountability coming from, not from public scrutiny in terms of organizations being open and transparent, but from the activism of tech workers. And this tech activism across the globe has been a feature of the last few years. And this is important. First of all, it scared some organizations, because they basically said our tech workers are really valuable and we don't want to lose them. So we've got to, you know, make sure that we're all working together. But also because it really shed a light on the negative side of data harnessing and data extractivism. And it's just really important that a lot of people have started to feel, hold on a sec, you know, I don't want to sleepwalk into all this without having a say. The debate that we're having right now on the tracking app, for example, the trace and the race to trace for COVID-19 is a clear symptom of that. You know, people are right to be worried, and they say, excuse me, how do I know that COVID data today is not going to be used for surveillance tomorrow? The issue there is that we have the role of tech workers is very important, and I do a lot of work with Prospect, and I do encourage you to come to really, young Fabians, to really look at sort of how young people in technology can really make a difference in terms of really looking at what is the role that if you look about ethical AI, yes, ethical AI has to mean that there is a multi-stakeholder approach. So if you look at assessing the intended and unintended consequence of an AI product, that needs to also include the impact that this is having on employees, how their work is going to change, how they are going to be part of the sort of transformation journey of a company. And so it's a collective exercise, and I think, you know, that is absolutely important, that the role of employees. And I have to be honest that I haven't seen much of workers' involvement stated in policies, procedures, and in sort of a European or UK level. You know, I haven't really seen it as a really important element of ethical AI.
Thank you for that answer. We have another markets-focused question, which is, you know, quite a, you know, one that is not uncommon, which is around free services. And it's kind of the question, which is, you know, saying that there's an implicit agreement for us to sell our data, basically. So I know you're against it, but some people might be willing to sell their data to a certain company for them to use in exchange for free services. So the question is, how do we is there a balance to be able to be struck where we maintain personal agency and are not frozen out of the free services that lots of people enjoy? Do you think that's possible, that balance?
Well, first of all, I don't think the onus should be on us. So all the time, there's always this onus on us. We have to make the decision. But we can't make the decision because most of the time we've got no alternative. If you want to use Facebook, or if you want to use you want to navigate a particular page, then there is no other other possibility other than accepting the terms that are imposed onto you. So it's a little bit of a misleading argument. The idea that we say that people are happy with the harnessing and harvesting of their data is misleading. The issue is we've got no alternative to it. And this sort of, they call it privacy paradox. So basically say, how come people say that they care about privacy, but then they just use all the services? Well, first of all, because the way that these things are presented to us is misleading. And second, often misleading. And second, because there is no alternative. Facebook is good. You can share photos, you get in touch with your friends across the world. It's actually fun to be on it for a lot of people. So there's no alternative, and that doesn't mean that people don't care about the data. This is where we move the onus from us to the companies, and I think the GDPR has had a little bit of effect, and not just in the EU but across the globe. E-privacy will have a major impact, and I think, to be honest, that a lot of companies, think of Google, are shifting. They are shifting. They and Apple, they are seeing the value of privacy even as a competitive edge for them. The idea that the people do value it, and therefore we are offering a more privacy compliant product because people trust it. And that's a big shift in the market. I mean, the other thing that I wanted to say is that things are changing in this. The issues like the privacy regulation, that will have the sort of really the biggest impact on all this. But there is a problem here. The problem is the architecture of the internet. So I don't know if any of you know, but the real-time bidding process, which is the real bid that happens in the fraction of a second where you open a page and an advert comes up to you. This real-time bidding process, it's completely privacy-free zone. So the architecture is there, and in fact, we've intervened so long after the development of the internet. I mean, so long and so late that all this has grown into a sort of wild architectural persuasion and manipulation online. So the thing is, we've got to curb that, and there is work going happening. There should be much more. There should be even much more enforcement, in my view. But we've got to change that, and that's, I think, the way that we move forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's go back to the topic of agency, so human agency. So you and many other professionals in privacy are concerned about the delegation of human agency to algorithms and so on. So I encountered a very interesting thought experiment on an AI discussion last week where we were asked, would you delegate your voting decision to an AI, assuming the AI is perfect? And I actually thought of, it might be a little bit playing devil's advocate here,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I would have thought that if I were voting for the first time in the European elections when I was 16, that might be a better personal outcome for me, because at that time I definitely didn't know what was best for me or what party lined up with my choices. So what do you say to those people who say, it's my agency and I will delegate it to whoever I wanted to, and if it's a machine and I trust them, then so be it? What do you say to those people?
Well, machines are not, machines don't exist in a vacuum. Machines are made by humans, and they have the values that the humans have. So unless, you know, you want to train your own algorithm and use it to make decisions on your behalf, and you train it, and then that's, you know, that could be happening in the future. You know, but the issue is that machines are just machines. They represent and replicate the values, the intentions, the desires of those who designed them. They are nothing neutral. They are nothing. They are political artifacts. Every single piece of technological artifact is a political one, because it really represents the person, the group who has designed them. So the idea that there is some sort of perfection of a machine is just very misleading. Even the idea that we could say, let's say, for example, some people say, but you know what, why don't we recruit people, use machines to recruit individuals for jobs rather than humans, because humans are biased. Well, machines are biased as well. If anything, all the human bias that get encoded into the system, they get escalated. AI just scales them up, and then they go everywhere. Now, people say, is there a way to fix this? Partly, technologically, yes, you can, a little bit. You can fix an algorithm from a technological perspective. You can say, I want it fair. But if you say, I want the outcome of that process to be fair, you have to make a political decision to have an outcome that does not represent society as it is now. So if you say, for example, I want to recruit, and I want to recruit a woman, then you've got to say, well, actually, you've got to intervene into the system with a political and social choice. Because products, AI products are what they are. They are made by humans, and they ingested data. They are historic data, but they also have parameters and features. They are decided by human beings. So the idea that you trust a machine because it's neutral and makes a better decision is wrong. Obviously, it depends on the area. You know, in precision medicine, you know, when you decide how much medicine, how much drug you're giving to a certain patient, yes, I mean, I could value that because of the ability of that machine to ingest such a huge amount of data to then be able to narrow it down, and to that is an important area of development which I trust. But in general, you know, I would be careful. If anything, you can have machines augmenting your ability, but not replacing yet.
Okay, yeah, interesting food for thought for everybody.
I mean, there is an interesting question around displaced workers. Yes, I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, the thing is, what's going to happen now after COVID? You know, are companies going to try and digitize and automate? We're already digitizing as much as possible, you know, but will AI speed up, or the COVID-19 speed up the digitization automation process? Are we in a situation that we need, you know, are we about to face a situation where a transformation journey which was about to last, I don't know, 12 months is going to be completed in 2? And if that's the case, are the checks and balances going to be in place or not, including the ones on what's going to happen to workers? Political solutions, some people talk about UBI, you know, robot paying taxes. I'm not in favor, because it introduces an element of personality, legal personality of robots, which is a tricky area. But, you know, but those are all political discussions that are very important. I mean, the labor as a value is going to change a lot. And honestly, I also think of course we must worry about what's going to happen to labor and the displacement of work. And we've seen this in the gig economy. But we also have to think about that this sort of glamorous AI, this fantastic, flashy product, they often also the work of millions of unpaid people across the world. You know, the New York Times have often told the stories of you know, AI used to identify polyps, and told the story of the hundreds and hundreds of workers in India having to spend all day looking at polyps. AI used to moderate hate speech online. Is based on hundreds of thousands of workers watching horrendous scenes online, really at a paid a fraction of what an executive or a worker in Facebook would be paid. And, you know, looking at all these images, all the, of, you know, day after day, developing post-traumatic stress disorders, just to be able to train a machine. So if you think about AI, immediately we think about displacement of jobs. Watch out, it's a bit more complex than that. It's the creation of a lot of unpaid work. It's the creation of a lot of low-paid work around the globe. And it's the displacement of some form of manual work, but also some change to white-collar jobs as well. So the picture is very complicated. Plus all the form of unpaid labor that we do, where we labor for companies, because by giving the data, by putting all the information about us, this is some form of unpaid labor that we also do. So the relationship between AI and labor is a very complex and fascinating one.
And on that topic of the hidden economy behind AI, you talked about lots of we're talking about the workers behind the algorithms, and you know, when Facebook announced that they're stepping up efforts to combat hate crime and things, they just hired lots and lots of workers from these often less developed countries than ours.
Yeah.
It sounds like a bit of a sorry situation. You know, it sounds like, you know, the textile workers and things as well. Is there anything we can do about it, or is this something that we perhaps have to accept as the least worst outcome?
Well, I think once again, you know, it's a matter of saying, well, what are we doing? You know, the geopolitical impact on all this is going to be incredible. You know, if you think, for example, how is AI automation going to impact countries? Well, you know, do we really know right now? Do we really know what are the countries where AI is going to impact the most? Is where, you know, where lots of the jobs that are going to be replaced by AI are going to be. And this might be not as automatic and not as intuitive as we think. So this might lead to sort of new equilibriums or new geopolitical dynamics that we're not aware of right now. The issue around, you know, I mean, look, when I was studying for the book and looking at sort of loads and loads of workers doing this job of scanning through every single image of a polyp, you know, these are jobs that then are lifting people out of poverty in some other countries. You know, it's much more complex, I think that we think, you know, and this is why I also define data as capital, because, you know, if you think about it, it's behaving is exactly the same way. And this, in order to understand the political responses to this, we've got to understand how this is moving at geopolitical level. I see a question in here about Sophia, which is really interesting. I mean, I'm not an expert of legal personality of AI robots. Sophia, yes, I mean that it really is really. I mean, there's a country where women are not allowed to just been granted the right to drive, and then, you know, but they can't go to get an ID card without the presence of a man, and then they give a sort of citizenship to robots. You know, that says a lot. But honestly, I just want to for a second stop and talk about Sophia for a moment, not because of Sophia in itself, but because of the humanization of robotics, you know, that we're seeing. So the robot is very much of a sort of female figure of support and assistance. You know, Sophia represents all the stereotypes of what a woman looks like. But it's not just Sophia, you know, like Alexa. You know, Alexa has got a female name. It does. Alexa doesn't, you know, you order to Alexa. You get children, boys at the age of 10 ordering a female voice to do things for you. You know, how is that going to shape the relationship between the younger generation, the kids of today, and the other gender, you know, and women? And if that is what we're doing, you know, creating hypersexualized robots and having sort of virtual personal assistants at home that have got female name and female voices. That is again, you know, one of the things that we're not, you know, in our worries about Terminator, we're not looking at what is the impact of Alexa and on our daily life. You know, there's quite a big one. There's been a lot of interesting studies on this that I quote a lot in my book around, you know, looking at virtual personal assistants and how they are gendered and how they're there to serve and not to contradict. I mean, I think that it's going to be a terrible impact in the future.
Yeah, it's really interesting how they design them as well, because they design them based on existing gender roles as well, because I think either Google or Amazon they did some market research, and they found that, you know, a female voice is just more receptive to everybody, and you know, so it is interesting how it's part of that chain, of that cycle of reinforcing stereotypes. So we talked a lot about data as capital. What do you think the changes to the data economy that we need if we are really to treat data as capital? Because as you pointed out, it's, you know, sometimes exploitative. It's it doesn't show up in balance sheets. You know, accountants don't audit the value of data. Can you even audit the value of data? So what should we do with this from this viewpoint?
Well, there's many things that we should be doing. I mean, in a nutshell, what I would like to see happening over the next few years, first of all, I would like to see a younger generation of people really getting involved into this discussion and taking ownership of this matter. What I'd like to see is a younger generation taking ownership of this at global level and facing up the nationalism and sort of the data sovereignty and data location. You know, everything has become so national at the moment. But, you know, but in order to sort out these problems and to create some governance, that needs to be global. And we are not in that position right now. I mean, we're seeing what's happening in the US. We're seeing what's happening across the globe. We've got to really think about how we introduce some element of global governance on this, a little bit like what we've done with nuclear energy. You know, when we have been able to an extent to put in place safeguards so that we do not so we stop and prevent all the potential harms, but we're able to leverage the positive side. So I would like to see that happening, and really younger generations say we are citizens of the world from an environmental perspective, and so the physical environment and the digital environment as well. And I would like them to go hand in hand, because increasingly so there is no difference between the two, and we walk between one and the other in a way which is much more continuous. The philosopher Luciano Floridi calls it on life, which means we are not offline and we're not online, we are somewhere in the middle at all times. So we've got to consider the physical and the digital environment as one. The other thing is the governance. I'd like to see some really solid governance around the way that we harness data, the way that we share data, the way that we address the harms that can arise from AI, following a really good fitness test of what's happening in this. The other thing that I would like to see is a change in the way that our in social platforms, they are based on manipulation. They're based on rewarding the everything when it's more divisive. So the more I post or the more I tweet, the more something is divisive, the more is engaging, the more I get algorithms ranking and put it up. I'd like to see this changing and becoming based on empathy rather than on division. And I think this is something that, you know, thinking of the social platforms and what social platforms are post-COVID is going to be very, very important, because they have been the social infrastructure and the infrastructure of a lot of parts of our economy. So how we deal with platforms moving on, and particularly what's going on in the US now. So we've got to think about that. And the last thing is really we need privacy and ethics storytellers. We need people who are able to tell the story of why privacy matters, and not privacy is a collective, it's an individual value, but why privacy is a collective value that binds us together, that holds us together as a society. People always, when they know that I work in privacy law, people always ask me, oh, you must be so careful about your data. You may be, you know, not. And I'm like, not really, you know, not really. That's not, yes, of course I am, but reasonably. No, I'm not really that keen on my own data. I'm more interested in, you know, where are we going as a society and what is the collective value of it. So I would like to see these things happening moving forward.
My final question, I think you've answered already, but I'll say it again if you have anything to add to that. But my question was, if you are made Secretary of State for Ethical AI tomorrow, Ivana, what would your first 100 days in office look like?
Well, I think first thing I would say is I want to see what is happening and if current legislation is working or not. And I would really say, okay, what are the harms, and is the legislation that we've got in place right now sufficient, or do we need new one? And then second, I would say, well, actually, I think we need labeling. I think we need to identify what due process is, and we need organizations that use AI, particularly in the area where they make decisions for people that can change their life completely. And I'm talking about housing, I'm talking about health, these decisions that if you don't get housing, you're locked out. If you don't get a loan, you're locked out. All these things that matter so much to individuals. In that case, I would make this completely accountable, completely transparent. And I would say, you want to use automated decisions? Well, yes, in that case, you've got to go through due process and encourage a really program of digital literacy across the country to make sure that people understand that decisions can be made by machine, how they can challenge that, and also where is the body they can go to when they want to seek redress.
Thank you for that answer, Ivana. I know who my vote's going for if that election happens. We're nearing the end of our time here, so if there are no further questions in the Q&A, I'd like to invite you to give some closing remarks. My
only thing would be really, I know you've got a pamphlet, you've got pamphlets coming, and you know you do a lot of work as Young Fabians. And it's amazing. It's really amazing. My final comment would be to continue to work on this, to engage with as many people as possible, to really understand what AI means, and that is way beyond technology, and to really involve as many people as possible in this discussion, and to say, you know, come up with bold ideas, because this is about our future as a nation, as a world, and it's not just about software. We need to make sure we're not softwared out. So we really need to own these issues.
Thank you so much, Ivana, again. And I've posted again in the chat the link to, firstly, the Young Fabians, so you can sign up to all the networks that interest you and hear of other future brilliant events such as this one. And secondly, again, the link to Ivana's book, which is out on Amazon Kindle since a couple of weeks now. So yes, thank you to all our viewers, our listeners, and especially to Ivana Bartoletti.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening all. Thank you.
Thank you.